All right, so you've sent over this big stack of articles all about at-home aligners. Guessing that means you're trying to figure out if ditching the old school braces for one of these newer options is actually doable.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be thinking about this stuff because the technology behind clear aligners has been around for a while. But this whole boom in the at-home
Right.
options, that's new.
It seems almost too good to be true, you know?
Uh,
Straighten your teeth without all the hassle, the orthodontist's chair routine.
yeah.
But what is it that's actually driving this whole shift?
I think a big part of it is definitely the convenience factor, especially for adults. I mean, who wants to be building their lives around appointments when you're
Yeah.
trying to work and have a life and all that? And the articles you sent mention that a lot. And plus, let's be honest, those metal braces don't exactly scream sophisticated professional now, do they?
Not really the look most of us are going for these days. But aside from just the convenience of being discreet, there's also the cost factor.
Mm,
Some of these at-home aligner companies are offering prices that seem way lower than traditional braces.
they do, and we'll definitely unpack that whole cost breakdown a little bit later
Okay.
because it's not always apples to apples. But even with those really enticing price tags, I think it's important to understand the bigger picture here because at-home aligners are essentially a technology-driven approach to teeth straightening.
Okay, so walk me through that a little bit. What does it actually mean for someone who might be considering this?
So basically, you're relying on software and algorithms to kind of map out your whole treatment plan. You're taking impressions at home instead of going into an office, and you're typically getting remote monitoring instead of those in-person checkups.
Okay.
So it's fascinating, but it does come with its own set of limitations, which we'll get into.
Right.
But first, I think to really get a handle on whether this is a good path for you, we need to compare it to the traditional route braces.
Makes sense. So it's like comparing a sleek new smartphone to a trusty old landline.
Exactly.
Both can get the job done,
Right.
but they do it in very different ways. So what are we talking about in terms of the pros and cons of each when it comes to straightening teeth? That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So let's start with the smartphone option then. At-home aligners. What did the articles have to say about their advantages?
Well, they all seem to agree on a few key things. First, they're generally more affordable, at least up front.
Right.
They're definitely way more discreet than those metal braces. And of course, they offer a lot more flexibility. No surprise there, right? People like to be in control of their own schedules.
Hmm.
But the big question is, are they cutting corners to achieve all those perks? And is that trade-off worth it?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it?
Mm.
What did the articles say about potential downsides?
One thing that came up a lot was the limited scope of treatment. It seems like most of these at-home aligner companies are really focused on mild to moderate cases.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you've got some crowding or spacing issues.
Okay.
But if you have like a severe overbite or underbite or something more complex, they might not be the best fit.
Right. That makes sense. Although I do remember one of the articles mentioned Candid as a potential exception because they claim to be able to handle even those really complex cases.
They do, yeah, which is a pretty bold claim in the at-home aligner world. It really challenges that assumption that you absolutely need traditional braces for anything beyond just like cosmetic fixes.
Right.
But even with Candid, I think it's still super important to, do your due diligence, read reviews, understand their process, maybe even get a second opinion from your own dentist.
Always good advice. Okay, so speaking of traditional braces, let's talk about that landline option for a minute. What are their strengths? They've been the standard for so long for a reason.
Yeah, for sure. The articles were all pretty consistent on this one. Braces are still definitely the most reliable option for those complex cases, especially anything that involves like jaw alignment or bite correction. And I think that's because they give orthodontists that really precise control over the movement of your teeth,
Yeah.
which is sometimes necessary
I see.
for those trickier cases.
So yeah, when it comes to effectiveness, it sounds like traditional braces might still have the edge in certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
But what about those downsides we were talking about, those metal brackets and wires? We can't exactly ignore those, can we?
Oh, absolutely not. That was definitely a recurring theme in the articles. They're just not the most aesthetically pleasing, and they can be uncomfortable, often come with food restrictions. And then there's that whole thing about regular adjustments, potential emergency visits if a wire pops out.
Yeah, those emergency trips to the orthodontist are never fun.
Not at all.
But let's go back to the at-home aligners for a sec. You mentioned they have some limitations. Are there any other downsides that we should be aware of?
Well, One thing to think about is just the sheer level of self-discipline involved.
Hmm.
Because with at-home aligners, you're essentially your own treatment coordinator, right?
Right.
You're responsible for wearing them for however many hours a day, keeping them clean, monitoring your progress.
Wow.
So for some people, that level of autonomy is amazing.
Right.
But for others, it can be a recipe for, procrastination or even accidental mishaps.
So you're saying that if I forget to put my aligners back in after lunch,
Yeah.
I could actually be setting back my entire treatment.
Exactly. I mean, consistency is key with any orthodontic treatment, but it's really crucial with the at-home aligners because you're not seeing an orthodontist every few weeks to check in and make adjustments. So if you're not diligent about wearing those aligners exactly as instructed, those teeth aren't going to magically straighten themselves.
Okay, so I'm starting to understand these trade-offs a little bit better. So let's say someone listening is a good candidate for at-home aligners.
Right.
They've got a mild to moderate case. They're ready to commit to that whole self-discipline thing.
Mm-hmm.
How do they even begin to choose between all the different brands out there?
Yeah.
You mentioned Byte, Motto, New Smile, ALIGNERCO. It just seems overwhelming.
It really can be. And honestly, the articles you sent, they just highlight how many options there are in this market right now, you know?
Right.
It's like trying to pick out a new phone these days.
Yeah.
There are so many different features and price points and marketing claims, it's enough to make your head spin.
And just like with phones, the flashiest option isn't always the best one. So what are the key things our listeners should actually be paying attention to when they're evaluating all these brands?
Yeah, so with all this in mind, how do we help our listeners avoid those aligner marketing traps and figure out which brand might actually be legit?
Well, I think the first thing is to look beyond just those big promises,
Mm.
like the fastest treatment or the lowest price.
And really dig into the actual treatment quality. Ask yourself, what's the level of expert involvement? Like, do they actually offer consultations with licensed orthodontists? Do they monitor your progress remotely? How closely are they really watching things? Because at the end of the day, you're entrusting them with your smile, right?
That's a good point. This
Yeah,
isn't like ordering takeout. You're talking about moving your actual teeth here.
exactly. And while expert involvement is definitely key, don't discount the power of, real life experiences. Go deep into those customer reviews. And I don't just mean the glowing testimonials that they put on their website.
Right.
Go look for those patterns in the feedback, both positive and negative, on those independent review sites.
Oh, yeah. Those independent reviews can be brutal sometimes, but boy, are they helpful for getting the unfiltered truth.
For sure.
So besides expert involvement in checking out customer reviews, what else should our savvy listener be considering?
Something that's not always explicitly stated, but it's so important. Look for transparency. Like, do they clearly outline their whole treatment process?
Mm-hmm.
Do they actually address potential risks and limitations? A reputable company is going to be upfront about what you can expect, even the not-so-fun stuff.
Yeah, it's like reading the fine print before you sign on the dotted line.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's your teeth on the line, not your credit score.
Exactly. And this might seem obvious, but make sure the company is actually properly licensed and regulated in your area. You'd be surprised how often people get so swept up in the marketing that they forget to check the basics.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. To bring it all home, what are like the top 2 or 3 questions that our listeners should ask themselves to figure out if at-home aligners are even right for them in the first place?
Okay, so the first question, and it's the most important one, how severe is your teeth misalignment? If it's mild to moderate, like we were talking about before, then at-home aligners might be a great option for you.
Mm.
But for those more complex cases, traditional braces are often the gold standard for a reason, and it's probably best to stick with what works.
That makes sense.
Mm.
And beyond the clinical side of things, what other personal factors should people be thinking about?
Honestly, it comes down to your lifestyle, your personality, your comfort level. Ask yourself, can I really commit to wearing these aligners for 22 hours a day? Am I comfortable with remote monitoring, or do I prefer those regular in-person checkups for reassurance?
Yeah, it's almost like choosing between a virtual workout class and going to the gym with a personal trainer. Like, both can work, but it just depends on what you thrive on.
That's a perfect analogy. And then, of course, there's the budget, right?
Right.
At-home aligners are often marketed as this more affordable option, but remember, cheaper doesn't always equal better value.
That is so true. Sometimes it's better to spend a little bit more upfront and save yourself some headaches, or toothaches as it may be, down the road. Any final words of wisdom for our listener who's now swimming in all of this aligner info?
I think ultimately the decision of whether to go with at-home aligners or stick with traditional braces, it's a personal one, right? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. But by arming yourself with knowledge, asking the right questions, and really understanding your own needs and priorities, you can make a confident decision. And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters most?
I love that. So well said. And remember, your dentist is also a fantastic resource for you throughout this whole process. Don't hesitate to pick their brain, get their professional opinion. Well, this deep dive has given me a lot to chew on, no pun intended. It's clear that at-home aligners aren't like a magic solution for everyone, but for the right person, they could be a game changer. It really comes down to doing your research, understanding the trade-offs, and making that informed choice that aligns with your own needs and goals.